Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you for joining me once again. Today, we speak to someone who is vitally involved in an area of government communication that probably doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, but it's vitally important. Our guest today is Shannon Kenna, and she is the Division Head of Communications and Parliamentary at the Commonwealth Treasury in Australia. Shannon is an experienced communication professional, been around for a long time, but she joined the Treasury in 2015 to manage a major government advertising campaign and has since managed the delivery of 5 federal budgets. And I'm super interested in exactly the communication story around the federal budgets, but we'll come to that in a moment. But as Division Head of the Communications and Parliamentary at the Federal Treasury, she manages a broad program of work, including the oversight of all of the communications functions. So she's got responsibility for media relations, social media, stakeholder engagement, corporate comms, speech writing, graphic design, publications, and the web. And she's also responsible for all ministerial and parliamentary business for the Treasury. So before she joined Treasury, she worked or began her public sector career at the Department of Immigration back in 1994. But she's also worked overseas in both the public and private sector, and she holds a Bachelor of Communications degree majoring in management from the University of Canberra. And she is sitting right across from me here on a beautiful day in Canberra. Shannon, thanks very much for coming to GovComms.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is must be a fascinating place to, as a communicator, to sit amongst what is a reservoir, a very, very deep reservoir of information that you've got to put together into a program, offline, online, busy. How do you do it? Where do you start?
That is a very good question, and I like your water analogy there of the reservoir. We actually talk about Treasury being at the waterfront of government policy. We cover the waterfront, so it touches on all aspects of the economy, policy, tax, super. There's a huge amount of stuff that we have to talk about. And I think it's been it's been a growing experience for me working at Treasury to work out how do we pull this all together. And I think the real centre point to it all is the budget. That sets the agenda for us for the year. That sets the agenda for the government. So it's where do we go from there? What do we take from that? How do we roll out comms from there? And of course the comms that goes around the budget itself. So it's a big exercise. It's not something that was done very. There wasn't a lot of focus on it at Treasury before I started. Yeah. It was probably more focused on being the sort of the shop that did the budget printing. I think I've made a real contribution at Treasury in lifting their communications function and expertise. But it's been a big experience.
Yeah. So take me through that, because I think that's fascinating, and there's people starting to realise and understand that the power and the value of effective communication that can actually help them to do their job, particularly the people who are, deeply skilled in policy or economics, who are working in the technical areas, to then understand, oh, hang on, if I get involved in this communications thing, that can help me. But going back to when you first arrived, how did you sort of start Treasury on this journey towards greater professionalisation of the communication and engagement function?
Sure. I think the kick-off point for us was, as you sort of mentioned in the intro, the fact that I was brought in to do a big government advertising campaign, not something that Treasury is very well known for.
Yeah. And what one was that, by the way?
So that was the Intergenerational Report campaign with Dr Karl.
Oh, dear. Okay, right.
Yes. And it was, it was a step out.
That was well, actually, we should talk about that because that's, okay, well, let's answer that question, but we'll come back to that because we have an audience, a global audience, and they're probably sitting there going, Dr. Karl.
The what now?
Yeah. So we'll come back to that because that's a really, really interesting case study.
Yep.
But anyway, going back to that campaign.
Yeah, I think I was brought in to do that campaign. There was an interest from the government to actually look at how they could communicate around the Intergenerational Report. It was an opportunity to set a forward picture of what was happening in Australia, looking at the fact that we had a changing demographic, how we were going to, pay for the services that people needed as they age. So for me, that was a huge communications challenge, and I was like, yeah, I want to be involved in that. And then coming into Treasury with, a lot of very clever, very policy-focused people, and talking to them about the fact that we needed to talk to the community. And they've traditionally probably focused more on their role being to brief the Treasurer and to brief our ministers, and to think broadly about the well-being of the Australian public, but not to actually directly communicate with them. So it was an education process and shifting them to understand. It was fascinating taking some policy people and getting them to watch research groups or focus groups and hearing what people were saying about, the policy or about the words that we were using and realising that, that doesn't work or that, So it was, exposing them to that kind of information really made a big difference.
Because I know that is a huge challenge for people in government communications is to get the technical specialists to understand that not everything has to go into the report.
Yep.
The language, okay, it may not be the words that you use, but they're the words that are going to use. So that's an interesting tactic you used by taking them to research and say, hey, have a watch of that.
Yeah, I think it was sort of tail-ended after we'd sort of gone through the development process with the campaign to also start getting ready for that federal budget. So the campaign launched in March of that year. The federal budget was at the start of May. So we had, I think, about 5 weeks on the air before we paused before the budget. And our focus in the team shifted to communications for budget and what we could do differently this year. So there was a big focus on, improving the website, actually putting case studies on there, looking at how we could communicate what the budget meant for people and drawing on the experience that we'd had with the campaign and applying that into the budget. So again, big change for Treasury and, it was something that people got on board with, but it often took a process of me and the team sitting down with people and saying, okay, so that fact sheet or that piece of content, that sounds great, but how about you tell me what this actually means? Like, I don't get it, so explain it to me.
Yeah.
And getting it in their words was for us the key point. That was our scripts. That was our scripts for our animations that we ran on the website. That was them explaining to us in simple terms what the policy actually meant.
And were they capable of being able to break it down and get it into that simple term? So when you did say to them, just like, treat me like someone on the street and you're explaining to me your role or your job. And they were quite capable of doing that. Yeah, it
actually broke down that sort of barrier of when you put the words in front of them on a piece of paper, their immediate response was to go into policy mode and to say, okay, well, that's not strictly accurate. We can't say that.
Yes.
If you get them to talk to you instead, face-to-face conversation, so tell me, what does this mean? And how's that going to affect people? How many is it going to impact on? And they'll just talk to you about it. And that's your content. That's what you take and give to the public because that's what it means.
Yeah. Now, this is fascinating you say that because this is an emerging theme that's coming through probably the last 3 or 4 months of talking to people in this sense of getting up from behind your desk and going and speaking to people.
Absolutely.
This is the modern role of the communicator is the enabler, is the person who joins up the organisation, who builds the confidence and strength across the organisation, but they're the connector.
Absolutely.
That's got to be the role, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's something that I believe very strongly in, is that we've got to be that almost, going back to my uni days, the boundary spanner between the government and the public. That's the role, to actually bridge that divide and explain how things need to be explained outside of our little bubble.
Yeah. So now listen, let's go back to Dr. Karl because
Sure.
this was from a content point of view. I remember when it came out, I was just absolutely over the moon to see it because it was really the first content-based approach to explain a government report, which, as you say, is the Intergenerational Report. But things didn't quite go to plan.
Yep.
Started well, but then what happened? What happened? What went wrong?
So what went wrong, I suppose, was that there was media and there was publicity around Dr Karl and the fact that he, as the face of the campaign, made some comments about his concerns about the content of what was in the report. So for us, that meant spinning quickly into crisis management mode. And it was a very intense 48-hour period.
It was heavy.
Yeah.
It was heavy.
Yeah.
You copped the full court press.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was...
Still getting over it.
Yeah. Somewhat scarred. Look, I think it was a bold move from government to look at actually having a face to their government campaigns and to their communications. They'd done it in the past, or they'd looked at particular things. The GST Unchain My Heart campaign was another one where they didn't use a personality, but they used a very evocative piece of music. To
Joe
connect.
Cocker.
Yeah, so we instead had used, someone who was an authority and who could speak to Australian people about a broad range of topics. And I think that was actually incredibly effective. The campaign itself was actually very effective. What we had in the middle of it was, a media sort of firestorm around Dr Karl, and it was really unfortunate, I suppose, because it took the focus off the campaign.
Yeah.
But you do what you do as a comms professional, and you pivot and you deal, and you address the issue. We very quickly moved on that. It actually shut down pretty quickly. Of course, everyone remembers it when you mentioned the Dr Karl campaign.
Because he effectively walked. What happened was he effectively walked away from his commitment to the campaign because rather mischievously, it was, all of a sudden it was interpreted that Dr Karl was then connected to all of the government's policies as opposed to the data that was essentially in this intergenerational report, which is effectively Treasury data, which is really an economics. So it was really a factual-based thing. Yeah. But the political side of it was to sort of handcuff him to a wider agenda, and therefore the pressure came on and he didn't stick with it.
Yeah, and it was, I think the biggest impact was probably on him and his brand or his profile. Yeah. Certainly the sort of the outcomes that we saw after that campaign was that the messages that we'd been putting into the campaign about the fact that, people needed to start paying attention to the fact that we had a changing demographic, that we needed to prepare for the future, that all resonated, that all got through. What happened with Dr Karl probably had more impact on him personally than it did actually on the impact of the campaign or the messages. Yeah. So it was also it was a distraction, though, wasn't it? It was a very big distraction, and I think it was also a difficult campaign, given that we weren't talking about a particular policy, we weren't talking about a particular program, we were talking about starting a conversation back when that was, not the kind of give and speak. So we did that, and I think we actually achieved that, and we were actually quite happy with the outcome, that we saw that shift happening. We saw people starting to talk about the economy and starting to engage with it. Yeah,
but interesting. So just in terms of that, what were the big lessons for you coming out of that particular campaign, and what happened? What can people learn? Because the purpose of this podcast really is for people to learn. So for someone sitting out there, what would be the advice with a big campaign like that?
It's difficult because I think it's expect the unexpected more than anything else, and expect that you're not going to have a smooth run. I think there's obviously using known personalities or particular things that might give you a hook in the door come with a level of risk. Yeah. And it's about being sure that you're prepared for that, making sure that your ministers, if you're in government, are prepared for that, and that everyone is comfortable with the level of risk that you're taking. And if you're not, you back out. So it's be prepared.
So did you identify that risk prior to the campaign, that he could have walked away, or you just didn't?
Probably not, no.
Yeah,
no,
because I do think that's again another emerging part of the credibility that comms can bring to the table, is that really clear understanding of risk and benefit early in the process. So when you're having those early conversations, what are the risks? What could go wrong? What are the likelihood of those risks happening? And then being able to show the communication addressing those particular risks. So
Absolutely.
I think that's definitely best practice.
Yep.
So listen, going to then, I'm fascinated. Oh, just before we go on from the Intergenerational Report, see, to me, I just think that it's just golden. It's a wonderful piece of work, which is really about the future. It's about what's happening and what's coming, and aging population and impacts of technology and density of populations in the city.
Yep.
But this is a story that needs to continually be told. And this is where I think content and content marketing in a government context can really come to the fore. And this is where I think, the intergenerational campaign broke some ground very early days in that it started to try to tell that story. How have you been able to sustain that story over time and continue to be able to talk about these issues? And if you have, how have you gone about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as you said, it was a big learning experience for us, and we got a lot of valuable research out of it as well. And it's often the case with government communications that you don't have the luxury of having big research groups with multiple members of the community. But we had a lot of research. We were able to use that to inform our future activities as well, whether it was the initial developmental research that we'd done or the evaluation research. We had that insight into what the community was thinking. So it was able to say then whether it was, for other communications activities within our portfolio, so whether it was with the Australian Taxation Office or others, to be able to say, well, this is what we found from this piece of work, or even looking at what we did for future budgets. This is what happened last year. We found that people, when you talk to them about the economy, think this. So this is what we need to do in response. Yep. So it was able to drive that kind of conversation. But I think it was also working quite collaboratively with the Minister's Office to pull together that broader narrative around where they wanted to see the messaging going and being able to influence and provide sort of guidance from what we'd found from the campaign. So I think it's come through as an undercurrent. It's probably not, apparent on the surface, but it is actually sitting underneath everything that we do.
Yeah. Interestingly, this, idea of big government advertising campaigns, and there's certainly obviously a place for those. But in your world, given that, the factors of media production and distribution have now been democratised and everyone can be a media business, and I think it's particularly relevant to government to be able to produce and curate and curate and distribute relevant, useful content consistently over time. How has it changed? How has that capability changed the way that you've gone about your work?
Look, to be honest, unfortunately, not a huge amount, because we're constrained by, certain arrangements that are in place in government. So there is a master media agency that works for government. All government advertising has to be placed through that. So when you're looking at paid content going out, we have to engage through them. But I think there's still plenty of opportunity and plenty of government agencies that are actually looking at more of the almost below the line stuff, or the smaller scale stuff that you're not spending millions of dollars on. No. You're actually just getting content out there to discrete groups, or to the right groups in particular, not just the whitewash. So I think that's changed probably, I think maybe more in the policy agencies. I think it's a little bit different in Treasury because we tend to focus on the bigger, broader policy narrative rather than the specific services and programs.
Yes.
But we do what we can to try and push our department along and push, our approach along, so that we're actually looking at what options we have to get out there in different ways and to really target what we're doing. Yeah,
it's interesting because we're seeing it in our work that, the demand for podcasts and the demand for webinars, and it's really working so well because it's, that narrow focus, getting to a specific audience who need to know about a particular program, or it just works its head off. And the clients are just loving it, because they can see the results. And again, by using the technology, it saves them having to go, spending huge amounts of money on travel and, it really is an effective way to start to deliver and to use these new tools that are there.
And I'm super keen to get into it.
Yeah.
And I think we've actually had, we've got a couple of people in the department, not in the comms area, actually some of our policy colleagues, who are doing like little in-house podcasts about policy issues. And we're jumping on that and going, okay,
Yeah.
so how can we harness that? And
Yeah.
what can we do? How could that work for the budget? What do we do? Where do we go from here? So
Yeah, that's
it's a
fantastic.
fantastic new area.
Okay, so let's talk about the budget, because to me, this is fascinating. So, this is, as you say, sets the agenda. It's where the money is.
Yep.
It's where the priority
All the money.
is. It's where all the dough is. So we know exactly what government is going to do, because you follow the money, you find the ideas. So take me through the budget process from a comms point of view. When does it start? So in Australia, for our guests from overseas, it's May,
Yep.
isn't it? It's like the first Tuesday?
Second Tuesday of May normally.
Second Tuesday of May. So we know it's coming second Tuesday of May, and that's when it all sort of but when does it start? When do you get working on it?
Realistically, it's probably crept earlier and earlier over the last couple of years, because we in the team have actually wanted to get on it a lot earlier. So in the last couple of years, we probably start planning late December, I would say.
Okay.
So we've normally got our plans in place from around then about what we want to do. A big component for us is that we run media and stakeholder lockups.
Yeah.
So we actually had this year, I think it was around 1,200 people locked up around Australia reading budget papers, which is a massive logistical exercise.
Has that grown over the years?
I don't. It's
because the
fairly
original lockup,
stable.
when I was a journo up on the hill, that used to be the one lockup, but
Yep.
now there's multiples.
Yeah.
There's other, associations and sort of other stakeholder groups get the opportunity to get a look at it.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure how long the stakeholder lockup has been running for, but it's definitely more than the time I've been at Treasury. So that's been an addition, which I think is a valuable opportunity for us to actually give our key stakeholders, industry groups, employer groups, not-for-profits, all of those people, the opportunity to sit there and actually engage in the budget and work out what their position is and give them that opportunity to prep for the media that will come following the release of the budget. The media side of it, I think it's probably been, growing and changing over the years. We have a lot of IT builds that actually happen up at Parliament House now and interstate. So people are actually getting their content ready to go live as soon as the Treasurer starts his speech. So we actually have to, facilitate that for them so that they can be ready to press the button at 7:30.
Yeah, because essentially what happens, for those of you who don't know, there's huge committee rooms and there's vast areas inside Parliament House which effectively are... It's a takeover from the Treasury. And as you say, there's this massive ICT overlay. Now, in the old days, we used to have the counting room for the elections here in Canberra as well, where, again, same sort of thing. Massive overlay to come in and to do this. We're not doing that anymore because technology's taken over. What's going to happen to the lockup? Is there a way that technology may be able to deal with that? Because I imagine the expense would be horrendously. It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. I think it's also something that a lot of journalists and a lot of others hold very dear to their hearts.
Indeed.
Don't get in the way of the lockup. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
So I think what we've been engaged in over the last few years and what I try to do across the board is that continual improvement. So rather than a revolution, it's an evolution.
Okay,
it's a general growing and changing. So what we've tried to do is actually move more into that digital space so that we're not relying on printed products.
The printing,
Yeah, there are a lot of people that are very, very wedded to their printed products though, so we need to make sure that that's still available for them. I think there's definitely scope in the future to look what we could be doing digitally around, embargoes and releases. We have made changes in that area. We're not flying copies of the books around the country anymore to sit, in other capital cities. We're now doing that through secure links. But it's a gradual process. We have to keep people moving forward.
Well, and that's the issue. These are very traditional, very important public institutions, and they're not going to, they're not going to be on the leading edge of innovation in a lot of this space because it's too important. Like they can't afford to be, right at the front. So being modest in your improvements, I think is fine. Okay, so we're in December.
Yep.
You've looked at that.
Yep.
And you've looked at that again and thought, grown. How much of your time does it take? Because that's like massive logistics. Or have you got a team of people who you say, okay, that's your job?
At this point, it's pretty much taking up the entire comms part of the division from probably... if we're looking at a budget in second week of May, we'd be on board fully from about mid-March.
And this takes up your whole time as
pretty
getting
much
this whole thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So
what about strategically though? What about trying to, understand, the distribution, as you say, like where you're relying on the media, but what about your own distribution of your own content? How do you do that if you're spending so much time with the administrative and logistics side of it?
Yeah, I think the struggle for us is being able to get across the messages, getting across what's in the budget and working out what we do with that.
Yep.
So that process would probably start around February, March when it starts to come together. There's been a lot of cabinet meetings, there's been a lot of decisions starting to be made. So then we get to start to look at some of the content, get an idea of what's going to be in it and what we can do with it. And, for us over recent years, the focus has really been more on the online side of things. So what can we put on the budget website? How can we approach it differently? We've used animations to try and break down some of the subjects and make it a little bit more digestible to people.
Yep.
But it's also having that close relationship with the Treasurer's office and working out for them what's their narrative, what's the things they need to highlight, because our goal or our role ultimately is to sit there and support them and make sure that they get the message out.
Yeah.
So it's from about March we start getting into that strategic side of things and start thinking about the messaging, start looking at what we're doing. There's whole of government media releases that get coordinated as well.
Massive.
And it's a big process.
It is a vast logistical exercise when you consider the size, the scale and the scope of the Australian government. It's big and getting bigger. And again, the budget touches everyone because that's where the money is.
That's right.
Yeah. So listen, in terms of your team, what sort of team do you have working for you to be able to sort of take on this?
Yeah,
task?
it's we've as you sort of mentioned in the intro, we've got a couple of people across a lot of different sort of functions. So obviously we have some graphic designers and publishing people whose role has always been to manage and maintain those budget documents and produce those. We have a small web team. We have some strategic comms people who sort of flip between focusing on the external facing, bigger ticket things, whether it's a Royal Commission lockup, whether it's, the budget, and then flipping over into internal or corporate comms, talking about Treasury as, an employer of choice. And then I've got a media and speeches team. And across all of these, we're talking about a few people. Right. So it's a small team. Yeah. We're lean and mean.
Is it going to grow?
No.
Is there any appetite to give you more resources to
tell, I wish.
But to tell a better story? Is it something that it's emerging in its capability, or perhaps are there ways? And I'm intrigued because this is another one of my big favourites. Is I believe that the communication function will be most effective when it's distributed in all sorts of different areas, and to understand that you've got people in policy who are saying, hey, we want to do a podcast about, it's like, great. Okay, so it's like, where can we activate, people who have got the skills and got the enthusiasm to do something so we can grow our team without actually growing our head count because we've got more people involved. Is that something that you're looking to do to try to encourage more people?
Well, it's to try and diversify the skills within the team. So I think we've probably grown over the last couple of years. So to be fair, I've already got more people than we had originally. Yep. The focus originally was just on those documents and, a tiny little speech writing function. So that's grown quite significantly already. I don't know that I'll get a lot more, but what we have to do is work out how to do more with what we've got. Yeah. So what we have instead is that we're upskilling and cross-skilling and retraining and getting people who, might have traditionally looked at one particular role to look at something else. And can we do this as well? And how would that work? And how are we going to address social media? What's the approach with that?
Yeah.
So it's the kind of thing where I like to try and see how we can make those connections externally, outside of government and inside government, and actually learn and see what we can do to improve our capability internally.
But it's really hard, isn't it?
Completely.
That's the aspiration, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we want to go to this and we want to speak to this and we'd love to do. But the reality is we're getting pounded on a daily basis trying to stay on top of it. I've got another sort of mission. I reckon there's a big opportunity to take what's known as a sort of balanced matrix approach to government communication, and the government should look at its communications workforce as a single workforce, as a profession, as they do in the United Kingdom. And the idea for me would then be, once you've got an idea of this whole workforce, is like, we know Treasury is going to get slaughtered at this particular time of the year.
Yeah.
Let's move some of our resources into that team, scale it up for that period of time. And then, okay, now we know that's done, and now we can move. So we get more agility and we get more experience, and so we build out the teams and we move the people to the need, as opposed to, Department X, we've got so many people and they're all ours, and don't ever think that we're going to share them because we need every last one of them. Where in actual fact, right now, if I'm the government, I actually need those people supporting our team over there who are getting run off their feet.
Yep, absolutely. And I completely agree. It's the kind of thing where, we try and do that within the portfolio. Obviously, Treasury's, a small agency in the scheme of things. We've got about 800 people. Yeah. We've got some very big players in the portfolio. We've got the Tax Office. We've got, ACCC, ABS, a lot of big agencies in there. So we try and draw on them when we can. But it's as you said, it's the kind of thing where if the focus is on this topic at this point in time, let's flow the resources there. Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is coming. I think this is coming, and I think it needs to come. And I think it's a much more efficient and better use of the resource. And I think it's great for the people as well. So imagine thinking, okay, I'm going on a 3-month secondment across to the Treasury to get ready for the budget.
Yeah.
And the experience that you would get from being involved in that project would be superb.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get it, just sitting doing your little job that you're doing it on every day.
No.
Anyway, that's another one of my campaigns that I'll get started. So listen, what are you seeing more broadly from a government communications point of view? Where are the improvements? Where are the changes? Where do we need to do more work? How can we be better at what we do?
I think it's probably, as you'd said, looking at those new opportunities or those new media and how we can actually more efficiently start our communications approach. I think that we've got to really move away from what we've done before and that sort of comfort area and look at how we can explore those new areas, because there's so many opportunities out there, and I think there's a reluctance to change how things have always been done because it works, it's easy. That's what my people are trained to do. So we need to start exploring what else is out there. We need to be looking at what the private sector's doing. That's something that I've really enjoyed, getting to run the campaigns in Treasury. We work with a lot of creative agencies, PR agencies, research companies, and we get to bring them in and pick their brains and say, okay, so how do you approach a brief? How do you do this? What do you do in these kind of situations? So it's actually drawing some of that expertise in rather than just saying, this is how government does comms.
Yeah. In terms of that skills, what do you think are the skills people need to have to be an effective contributor to a government communication program?
I think it's probably that focus outside of the agency. I think there's a tendency to be quite insular and not really think about who it is that you're talking to. The good old Canberra bubble. You don't think about who it is that you're actually talking to out there and what's actually important to them. And often it's not the big government issues. It might not be the big economy message that the government is trying to push. Yeah. It might be that, I don't know how I'm going to pay my parking fine. I don't know how I'm going to pay for my groceries. So we need to look at what are actually the real issues for people on the street and understand who you're talking to so that you can actually communicate effectively.
Okay. And in terms of the numbers of people, are you getting access to enough people, coming in when you're advertising for jobs? Are you seeing the right sort of skills, right sort of attitudes, right sort of curiosity, which is essentially what you're talking about there, that empathy?
Yeah, I'm pulling a few faces because it's a yes and no. I think you can get, it depends, it all depends. And it's been a real flux in government recently of, a lot of people applying for jobs and then very few people. I think you try and do things where you get people to be quite agile and move quickly and you get less interest. So there's still probably within government, within that sort of pool, there's that reluctance to be not secure.
Yes.
So the idea of moving to something temporarily is quite challenging to some people, or to a lot of people, it seems.
Yeah.
So we've looked at how we can actually get some quite flexible secondment programs working from within our team to other areas, which is working really well. But they're all quite short term. They're all 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. Right. But that gives you exposure. That gives you a bit of a toe in the water somewhere else. But when you actually try and get someone in for something slightly longer term, it doesn't seem to move as quickly, which I find quite frustrating.
All right, we're just about to wrap it up, but looking, 12 months into the future, what's the one, if we're sitting here in 12 months' time having another conversation, which I'm sure we will, what's the one thing that you'd like to have achieved in this next 12 months that would have helped, strengthen communities and improve the well-being of citizens through the work that you do?
For me, it's the focus is actually on the budget. So it's about what can we do differently for next year's budget to actually make it different, to make it better. To make it a better communications piece, and to actually start to get some of that content out there, and maybe even look at whether we can actually make it a bit more of a whole of government exercise, so that the comms doesn't stop on budget night. We look at how it rolls out over the course of the year, and can we bring it back to with the original starting point of it was in the budget. This is something that we did. Now
you're talking. I reckon this joined up approach. Look, it's possible, and it's going to happen. So I think
I'll get there. Don't worry.
Exactly. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experience with us, your knowledge. Again, the purpose of the podcast is for people to take some things away, take some insights away, and just be a little bit better maybe tomorrow. A couple of ideas here and there, and there's so much in that conversation. So thank you so much for coming in today and sharing. It's springtime here in Canberra, ladies and gentlemen, and it is glorious. I was up walking on one of the hills around Canberra this morning on Red Hill, and just looking south to the mountains, which is down towards the snowfields, and it's just, makes you think this is fantastic. And working in government, I reckon, is just so much fun. It's so important, the work. Just before I let you go, is that mission piece really, that drives it, gets you out of bed every day? Just think, okay, I'm actually doing something good here.
Yeah, it does. It's how can I do good comms? Yeah. It's how can I make this better? That actually really, really does inspire me.
Yeah, but with a purpose. With a real purpose of if I get this right, maybe I can have a bit of an impression somewhere that's going to make Australia a better place. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so thank you to Shannon Kenna for coming in, the Division Head of Communications and Parliamentary at the Federal Commonwealth Treasury here in Canberra, Australia. So thank you to you, Shannon, for coming in, and thanks to you, the audience, for coming back once again. I'll be back at the same time in a couple of weeks, but thanks so much for coming, and I'll be back then, and I look forward to your company then. So for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.